I thought it'd be an interesting time to kind of look back a little bit because a lot has happened over the last year or two. It also goes some way into explaining why some things I used to do and some things I used to be on top of, I just aren't on top of anymore. It's kind of the reason why I'm making so many changes and starting new channels and stuff like that to get back on top of things. But literally just a couple of years ago, I was in a really, really small bedroom somewhere in southeast London. And now, in some ways, it feels like the blink of an eye. In other ways, it feels like the longest time ever. I'm now here, somewhere in an unspecified location, elsewhere in the UK, in one of the most technologically advanced homes in the country. It's a weird change, and it took jumping between two different intermediate rental properties before getting here in the process of the builders putting the house together, of which I was involved all the way throughout the process. It's not my money, it's my parents' money, but I wanted to help out. I wanted to get involved because I wanted to put my hand on it if this is the place I'm going to live. This space, this studio, is my design, and all the way throughout the house, different elements, stylistic elements, which I can't really show you for security reasons, I had a hand in. There are multiple things that I've gone through in the last year or two that individually I would consider to be full-time jobs, but sadly they don't pay anything. Saying that though, obviously this pays itself in the space. It's a complicated relationship, it's a family space. So helping family isn't something you should think about in terms of a reward structure. But it is an important life investment to put effort into this family project, this family home, to make sure that it's the best place for my parents as they grow older, and also for myself and my brother. The medical stuff as well is itself a full-time job, some issues more than others, which is sometimes a difficult thing to convey to people. It's fine kind of being, like the hardcore business bro, which there are quite a few in our community, and optimizing your life for a grind set. What supplements do you take every morning? When do you exercise in the day? What are your allocated work hours? What do you do, etc.? That's all fine for the purely privileged who are stable enough every day to make sure that that operation can run every day. And, I absorb the social content from those people in our community. And, sometimes the messaging is a little bit toxic in the way of I get so angry when I see people that are lazy and they complain about life all the time because all they need to do is just try harder. It's never as simple as just trying harder. That's sometimes part of it, right? But there are deeper issues at play. So what I wanted to do was, on this eve of some large changes, I just wanted to do a bit of a retrospective. In around October 2023, my nan sadly and suddenly passed away from complications relating to a brain tumor. More specifically, complications relating to a brain tumor surgery. It wasn't the tumor itself that caused the ultimate problem. It was the fact that a surgery had been done, then a follow-up one had to be done, and they did not anticipate bleeding after the fact. This annoys me for several reasons. Obviously, there's a part of the world inside your head that says you're not supposed to be angry at doctors and the medical institution because they did what they could. However, I have this thing in my brain that's been growing through all of my experiences with doctors and hospitals and the world at large. I'm trying to fight that don't just call other people lazy, bug. But you think, you live in one of the most privileged first world countries in the world, and in a hospital with some of the greatest talent in the country, how could they not anticipate that kind of bleeding after a surgery? Sounds like a massive skill issue if you ask me. But you're not allowed to think like that, because it's rude. But the weird thing about it is that happened at the hospital where, I don't know if you've watched my video about my blood lancing tour I made, but I spoke a bit about my experience with medical trauma, particularly regarding blood tests. That situation happened at the same hospital. So it's a weird thing going back there and kind of wading through that life experience with everyone there and saying goodbye. I say that with air quotes because I didn't really have a chance to say goodbye. At that point, the damage was unexpected and done to such a degree that there was nothing really there to say goodbye to, but we tried anyway. A couple of months later, I had been experiencing trigeminal nerve pain in my face. They call this a suicide disease, trigeminal neuralgia. This had been going on for a few months, but it had started to increase and getting to a point where it was interrupting my thought process. So the stability of my day-to-day life, again, you have an idea for how you're going to work and how you're going to maximize and become the greatest force for productivity you can be, but something afflicts you. For me, this was, at that point in time, trigeminal neuralgia. Now, I already knew that I didn't have a tumor because back in February of that year, I had my MRI brain scan in search for the balance issues, for which they discovered posterior canal dehiscence on both sides. But I'm very good at tracking cause and effect with problems now, and I managed to figure out that the neuralgia I was experiencing was caused by my dental strangeness. I have 5 wisdom teeth, not anymore. Obviously, there's one too many. It's quite a rare thing. It's buried up in my skull here, behind the upper left one. Strangely, that side wasn't the problem. The right side, I had pockets behind my wisdom teeth, and I would always have to use like a dental pick to clean out debris from behind them. Over time, the pockets behind them would slowly, very slowly, deepen in size as that had to be done. And what I believe was happening was that the pocket was getting deeper, slightly closer towards the trigeminal nerve, and when it would get irritated from the cleaning process, it would cause a very slight amount of inflammation, which would compress the nerve, and that would cause the pain. I noticed a few things. So like that pain would only appear after doing the cleaning process, not immediately, but at a delayed period of about a few hours maybe. I picked up on that pretty quickly. A few hours later, it would start appearing and it would be weird. It would be like a tingling at the end of the canine, and it would be like a referred pain, almost like a cramp type pain, but very localized around the face. It would not actually hurt where the tooth was. It would just be referred all over, but only ever on that half. I knew I'd have to get the tooth removed to try and make space for the gum to like depress away from the nerve. So I spoke to my dentist and she said it was possible. I have a very good dentist. I've seen her my entire life since I was born up until this age. I don't trust anyone else with my teeth. Eventually, we made the decision to get it done. And usually dentists here in the UK are a bit resistant to removing the lower wisdom teeth because there are particular risks involved that I think dentists in the US kind of neglect sometimes, mostly to do with nerve damage. I actually spoke to some US friends recently that were like, yeah, when I had my tooth removed, my mouth went a bit numb for a while and I don't know why. Maybe I was just recovering. I was like, that's why they don't do it here. Immediately, the roots were too close to the nerve. When they extracted it, it caused temporary nerve damage, which is why your face was numb. So anyway, we made the decision to get it done, and it didn't exactly go to plan. They had to section the tooth into different sections. I didn't have any sedation. We don't really do that here, not unless it's essential. It took about an hour or just over an hour to extract the tooth. It was a bit complicated because they use this kind of side profile X-ray thing to see the layout of the roots, but it was more complicated than expected because there was an extra kind of hidden root that couldn't be seen on the side profile. It was hiding behind one of the other roots. It's kind of difficult to make out, but it meant that things couldn't really be pulled out easily, so that's why it took so long. When there's tissue damage, and for people that have thrombocytopenia, which I do have, there's a chance for something called a dry socket to occur, which is where the clot doesn't properly form over where the tooth's been extracted, which can lead to the bone being exposed. Then it causes an immense amount of pain and other disgusting symptoms. And sadly, that's what happened. I ended up with a dry socket for my lower right wisdom tooth. So then I ended up with like a couple of weeks of pain. I had to get it packed with some medicated gauze of some kind. And then immediately I was flown away with my family to America for some kind of family trip thing. It's always frustrating for me because when I go through things that disrupt my stability on the day-to-day, I never like to have my free time interrupted, because if there are any days when I finally start feeling okay again, then I want to be able to make the most out of that. So it is annoying to me when things like that happen. Obviously, I should be grateful for a family trip, but when it comes after like suffering, you're like, I just want to stay in one place and just enjoy normality for a bit. So I got over that. Around the same time, a new symptom was appearing, pulsatile tinnitus. This is where you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. It seemed to be occurring more in the left ear than the right ear, more so when I was laying down in bed, and even more so when I had my head slightly turned to the left, which made me worried about vascular issues, because that usually only happens when you've got like an artery issue. Actually, it's not really an artery, I think. Sinus, veins and all that. I was going to get that checked out. I never did, actually. I had it for months. It was coming on and off, and I wondered if it was to do with the bone thinning they detected in my inner ear. But that then again started disrupting my sense of normality. Hearing your heartbeat in one ear is a very disturbing thing. Then in the February, so a couple months later, I encountered my crazy, weird eye problem that has lasted for over half a year. That was a massive one. Probably one of the biggest issues I've ever had, where a scratch to the cornea, at least that's what we believe it was, because the person I saw at urgent care noted a scratch, caused months and months worth of nerve-related symptoms: neuralgia, foreign body sensations, cold and heat where there shouldn't have been, random spiky pains, burning whenever the lid closed, just over the top, way out of proportion. And I became an immediate expert in corneal neuralgia and neuropathy. And kind of going back to my disappointment with the medical system, I described it as like borderline, I don't want to use the S word, muicidal for a couple of days. But the thing that depressed me more than anything else and put me into like the lowest spot ever was my disappointment with how shitty the basic level of education for every single freaking ophthalmologist I found in the country, everyone I spoke to, everyone I researched, they knew nothing about it. Nothing. And it's not even that complicated. The cornea is full of nerves, they get damaged, symptoms happen. And hardly anyone I could find, only one person in the end that I stuck with, could tell me what was a nerve-related symptom and what wasn't. Is this nerve pain? Is it not? I don't know. Maybe not. Like, where's the education? It's 2024. We know what nerves are. We know what they do. We know what things feel like. I got sent to a renowned professor that specializes in corneal surgery. Didn't have a fucking clue. He thought I was making the whole thing up. He was quite horrid, to be honest. A very dismissive personality. He was late to our appointment. He had his lunch just before. His breath stank of fish. He didn't have a COVID shield for the slit lamp. An absolute prat all around. So I changed my method for picking people out. Actually, I didn't really get to choose him. They assigned him to me. Afterwards, I chose someone at the same hospital with more of a research background because I knew this second guy had a lab and I thought, okay, he's going to have more exposure to edge cases. And he immediately knew what was up. Immediately. And it was so reassuring to me because in a follow-up conversation, there were some moments where it was the first time someone professional actually understood what I was talking about. I said, hey, the pain has always kind of been isolated in the right eye here. And like the spiky thing has started reducing since taking the corticosteroids. But there's this inner eye burning that seems to have, for some reason, migrated to the left eye now. But not all the time. It's like this thing where they can't exist at the same time. It's like this kind of fluctuating mirroring thing. And he said, yeah, I see that with so many other corneal neuralgia patients. But yours, this fluttering thing, is actually happening later down the recovery curve than other patients I've seen that have this. Something like that is the first time someone's actually said, you're not fucking mad. And I've seen this with a lot of other people. And it kind of helped to outline for me like what recovery looks like for nerve and neuralgia related symptoms. I also asked him if the pain that I had been experiencing from my dental issues had sensitized the trigeminal nerve in some way. Maybe this was a contributing factor to why I was so sensitive to these firing signals. And he thought, yes. He said it's quite likely that that's actually related, that may be one of the reasons why. If another person had the same kind of injury, they may not experience any symptoms, or the recovery may be extremely quick. But for me, because I've already had some fuckery with this nerve, it may be a contributing factor. It was mad to me, but I was grateful to have stumbled on that researcher. He's a surgeon, by the way. I call him a researcher because he's notable and notably separate from the other people that work there because of his research background. And he was very much in demand, especially compared to the professor, who it seems was not that in demand. Surprise, surprise. But I cannot emphasize how much of a bad mental state it had put me in after being dismissed by the professor. I started putting together some weird plans that I have not told anyone, or I kind of alluded to. I was going to start a fight with the ophthalmology community in the UK. I had started like isolating all of the major researchers. I basically found every indication of in vivo corneal confocal microscopy that had been mentioned in research papers. I tried singling out professional ophthalmologists that had any contact with the technique. Then I was putting together like a detailed profile of my symptoms and reports of people that had killed themselves from having corneal neuropathy and reports of other people that had been dismissed by doctors, and I was going to push all of it onto them. I've got some techniques for getting things seen by people, and then kick up a riot about how inadequate the diagnostic process is for corneal nerve damage in the UK and how woefully far behind it is America. The American Academy of Ophthalmology has a whole bunch of papers that are just so far ahead in terms of like watching the progression of branching and nerve damage. When the nerves are damaged, they make all these weird patterns as they regrow. And the immune system has like these weird cell responses there, which is part of like the triggering process for a bunch of the weird pain you get. But they can actually watch how they reshape over time when nerve growth factors are reapplied. But anyway, I'd gone like full intelligence community mode, mapped out people in the UK and their secretaries and people that surrounded them. I was like, okay, let's create some waves. Where are the conferences that ophthalmologists congregate? And which ophthalmologists are already sympathetic to corneal nerve damage. I found one in particular high up north that was a bit eccentric, that had already written blog posts about it and how people get left out. And I was like, okay, that could be my vector in there. I know he likes to collect artwork. I know that his father was an artist, and I know that he accepts donations for like the child wing of his hospital. So if I go to him, he'll be sympathetic to the issue. I will then hand him something. I'll make a donation to the children's wing of the hospital. Then I'll push this on to like another one. I was like full planning out shit like that. I was like, I will not be silent. I will not be ignored, and I will become infamous in the ophthalmology community. I was like, I will just revel in being the annoying twat for anything just so long as people listen. I was sick of not being listened to. I was not going to take that. So I was working on this big project called the Open Medical Report that was also going to take every like story I could find of anyone who had ever been misdiagnosed or ignored by doctors, and also flood that to like MPs, so members of parliament. Like it was going to be this big report project, something that could be handed to politicians and other people just to push how shit the diagnostic process is in the UK just for any medical issue. Like I went full activist mode, but that takes a lot of energy. When I finally then got to see a researcher that understood my problem, I scaled back because I was like, look, this is a big risk. I can do this. I can commit my life to it. I was also at that point fueled on by, again, the death of my nan and how she had kind of been dismissed for a while. There's a bit of stuff going on there because the GP that they went to was very dismissive, really annoyed my auntie, who then like wrote a letter to the GP, and then they told off like members of staff, and they wanted to like keep some communication going with my aunt to see how they could improve things. And I was like, look, this is the time to be an activist for the healthcare system in the UK, but I know it would make me look weird, and that's obviously something you can't talk about on the main channel. People know me for Blender videos. They don't know like what the all of this stuff going on. It was my sole commitment at that point in time, the first half of 2024 this year, to be a political healthcare activist in some way, but under the radar. But the point is, I could not work on anything. Why would I do 3D artwork? Why would I make add-ons? Why would I make resources? People are getting upset at me for not doing updates for the things that they've purchased. I was entirely consumed by this raging state of mind. Every day, my eye was burning. I was in pain. Every day I cried internally and sometimes externally about not being listened to. I was not stable enough to work the general 9 to 5 of this YouTube job. And yeah, it did give me some anxiety. I thought, what will people think? My output has dropped significantly. Everything's disappearing. What do I do? But I can't put that stuff aside. I have a sense of what's right, and I feel like this is something I should fight for. Maybe one day I'll get out of it. And it's really weird now because I am almost out of it through a lot of work, through a lot of analysis, and essentially, very essentially, with help from my researcher. Going back to the chronology, that eye issue started in February of this year, a couple of days before my birthday, which is great, kind of rubbing salt in the wound. So it wasn't a very good birthday. Then, very shortly after, I had a physical injury. The rental we were staying in, the landlord of which was a complete cow, and put our lives in danger. She had been given a warning about the boiler being dangerous. She had ignored it. She had then gaslit other people that were coming to work on it by saying that it wasn't dangerous. We then asked them. They said, yes, it was dangerous. It was this whole thing. She also asked us to like lie to companies to get them to come out and do work sooner. An absolute twat of a human being. The house wasn't really that safe. There was moss all over the exterior. There was a point where a gate was open and we didn't want the dogs to get out and run out the gate. So before they could get there, I ran towards the gate to close it. There were some steps before it. As I put my foot on one of the steps, my foot gave way. So I flipped backwards. I basically flew back, and then I landed my back on the edge of the step. And somehow as well, my leg had gotten sliced up on the way down. So let's bring this up. Ignore the scratches there, they're new. So this is from February. We're now in November, close to the end of November. So that got sliced up and that was gushing. But mostly the damage was done to my lower back and my arse cheeks, which took the brunt of the force. So well done to my buttocks. That took a while to recover from, and I weirdly found it interesting that so many of my issues up to that point had been so obscure and weird and misunderstood that it was weirdly nice to have a problem that was easy to understand. Oh, you're feeling pain? It's because you fell over and your muscles are damaged and it's causing this. I was like, oh, I can understand that. Yay, finally. Something I don't have to go like wacko mode about. Weirdly, February seems to be a bad month, like for the last couple of years. In 2023, it was when my vestibular issues spiked, chronic, constant BPPV, constant vestibular migraines, and then this year, eye problem, falling over, etc. And in between all of this, again, helping out with this house, going to the meetings, not getting any compensation for the time wasted on literally everything I had to deal with. Then what happened? Okay, so part of the recovery process for the nerve problem was to bathe my eye in steroid. Not literally, well, maybe kind of literally. The application of hydrocortisone sodium phosphate, a very soft steroid, but not everyone's body reacts to steroids in the same way. So it did seem to make an improvement to certain symptoms. Actually, some of the worst symptoms did end up going away after a while of using the steroids, which is brilliant. It did take time though, it took a few months. But then something else happened. I started getting strong pain in my chest, very spiky pain. I had experienced this before, but it was usually fleeting. It would go away when I threw up. It would last a night. But something about this time was different. It lasted for an evening. I got up the next day. Breakfast was kind of okay. At lunch, it came back and I had to throw up again. It was like this cold regurgitation associated with this pain just everywhere around the chest, like it was going to explode, like pressure. I knew this was gastritis. And because of that, I immediately self-medicated with lansoprazole, the proton pump inhibitor, which is what you do, to prevent acid from damaging your stomach. You can take it before non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. You can take it if you've got ulcers, etc. It's brilliant for quality of life. It does cause malnutrition issues, and it's also potentially toxic to the inner ear, but it's really useful stuff. I was still taking the steroids at this time, and what concerned me was that despite taking the PPI, which usually helps me to get over episodes that feel like that, it wasn't going away, and it was actually getting worse. Over the following days, other weird symptoms started to appear. I would get this feeling, not like a spasm, but like something wanted to come up, but there was nothing there. It's a very difficult thing to explain. It's like your senses tell you something's coming up your throat, but there's nothing. There's no movement. There's no contraction, there's no spasm, but it just feels like there's something coming. No acid, just sensory. I was like, is something disturbing the sensory nerves there? Every evening I would have some kind of stomach discomfort and aching and pain. I'd be like, what the hell is happening? And then in between meals, I would get these really strong hunger pangs. And when I was looking into it, all of these symptoms were indicative of having an ulcer. A small ulcer of some kind, because you can get ulcers that don't profusely bleed. I went to the doctor about it. I said, do you think these steroids could be involved that I'm taking in my eye? And they said, nah, it's very unlikely because not that much steroid reaches the stomach. And I was like, okay, fine. But I had a suspicion at that point, which is why I asked. I was like, steroids are known to cause gastritis when you take enough of them orally to your stomach. So I was like, okay, well, here's a correlation. All of a sudden, I've got this unfortunate case of gastritis that's not going away. And I also happen to be taking steroids. So maybe they're related. But the doctor was like, nah. And then they were like pushing around in my stomach. They were like, does it hurt here? I was like, no, not at the moment you're pushing it. It's like, oh, if you had an ulcer, it would definitely hurt if I pushed down. I was like, would it? What if it was like just a small one, like a really mild one? I was like, okay, well, there are a few possibilities. If it's not the steroids, which you don't think it is, it might be H. pylori, which is a bacterial infection, a specific type of bacteria. So they gave me a test to do that, which is a stool test. But again, my faith in the healthcare system, when I went to pick up the test, first of all, the doctor hadn't submitted it properly to the receptionist, so they didn't know what to give me. And then when they did realize what to give me, they gave me the wrong stool test, and I recognized it right away because I have experience. Sorry, it was an FIT test for cancer. But silly me, I was like, you know what, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and I'll ignore my intuition and I'll just do this test and hand that in. So I did that, and several days went by, a week went by. I was like, I haven't heard anything. So I went in to ask about it, and the woman at the desk said, oh yeah, it seems on the record that the test could not be performed because an incorrect sample was submitted. And I was like, Jesus Christ. Why don't I just listen to myself sometimes? But I was also annoyed because I was like, I'm still dealing with this thing going on here. So this and everything else. I was like, why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you contact me as soon as you got the message back from the lab that said the sample could not be processed? Why didn't the GP just message me rather than me having to chase them up about it? Because it's just a waste of time. So I made them give me the right sample, and I did that. Test came back negative, but I also did a home test that came back positive. So I said to them, look, we've got mixed results. I've still got a problem, and it could be a number of things. So I said, if you gave me the antibiotic course for H. pylori, if it wasn't H. pylori, then the symptoms will continue. If it was, then they will stop. Why don't we just do that and figure it out rather than going straight for an endoscopy? Obviously, they're very resistant to give you antibiotics because they got policies about that here. They're very stringent about not, causing a bacterial resistance to antibiotics, even though they hand them out like candy around the world. How much of a difference is it going to make here? I know it's an irresponsible thing to say, but if bacteria is going to grow a resistance to it, then it's going to happen anyway around the world. Why make this first world country the highest point of suffering by resisting distributing the antibiotics here the most compared to other countries. So we decided we'd go the endoscopy route in the end, because obviously they didn't want to hand out anything. And I was like, okay, I don't want to go public because I want to know who's going to stick something down my throat. I've had an endoscopy before, and I knew the guy that did it because I had picked him out as a private patient. This was back in 2020 when I was having sensory breathing issues, not related specifically to COVID damage, but rather some kind of new immune reaction to milk protein that was provided by COVID. Very weird. So I chose a new gastroenterologist this time. I was like, look, this guy, I want to see him. Can you write a referral? It took them a month to write the referral, but I had already contacted his secretary in advance because I didn't want to wait that long. I was like, look, they're sending one, but can you book me in? She was like, yep, I can do that. So I got in, I saw him. Fantastic mannerism. This doctor, I love picking out my own doctors because if they've done videos online, occasionally the hospitals ask them to do videos and they've got a nice, calm, intelligent demeanor where it actually sounds like they're nice people and that they'll listen to you. I like them and I get on with them very well. This guy, brilliant. Didn't dismiss anything I said. I relayed my concerns about maybe the steroids would be involved. He said, in theory, they shouldn't cause a problem. But he did say that's in theory. He was very open to the possibility that they could be the cause of the problem. We said we'd go in, we'd do biopsies, we'd look for H. pylori while we're there, as well as other issues to see what's going on, and see if we can kind of knock off the possibilities and figure out what it is. I did not have to wait long to get the endoscopy, just like a week or two. And I kind of surprised myself because, again, I'm kind of introverted, right? And I'll try to avoid situations like this wherever I can. It takes a lot of energy to put yourself out there and do something like this. But I think I was quite proud of myself for actually going through with this. I also, this time, said, no sedation, please. I don't want to be sedated when you're doing the endoscopy. Don't put me under, don't sedate me. The reason being was that the last time I had an endoscopy, the sedation didn't make me feel calm necessarily or make me forget anything. It just made me dizzy and feel kind of sicky. It might have helped a little bit. I wouldn't know. So this time I said, no sedation, just go in. Now, I will say, it was not a very comfortable endoscopy. Maybe it was just how I was positioned or how I was laying, and I'm sorry if you're a bit squeamish, but when the tube was down my throat, and it's very weird, I know that it made an impact on my brain because I can feel it, like when I think about it now. It was pushing on the right side of my throat. Now, they do use numbing spray, right? But clearly it wasn't enough on the right side. So I could feel the whole thing down my esophagus and out my throat, pushing the right side as I was laying there the whole time. And I did gag quite a lot, but I just focused on the breathing that I could. Oh, it makes me want to gag now thinking about it. Focused on my breathing, got through it. I could also feel when they were taking the biopsies. It was weird. It was like it wasn't super sharp, but it was like a deep tickle. Anyway, they got that done, and he noted something interesting. He said that I had a hiatus hernia, which wasn't noted in the last endoscopy. So I think I must have developed it within the last 4 years. Doesn't seem like it would be the reason for all the symptoms I was having though, but I think I might have caused it by throwing up in the recent time due to the gastritis, because you can give yourself a hernia there by violently throwing up. Anyway, when the results came back for H. pylori, they came back negative, and I was like, okay, that's a pretty comprehensive test. Very invasive. Go in, have a look. Nothing there. They also checked the small intestine as well, because I'd read online about it being missed in people until they looked in the small intestine. So I was pretty clear about that. Now, at this point, I'd been off the steroids for a little while, right? And the symptoms had improved, but I didn't know whether it was because of coming off the steroids or whether it was just like a local trauma that was improving. After we were done with that, I left it quite a while before starting to take the steroids again because I was scared. I didn't want to have the pain come back. Eventually, because my eye problem comes and goes in phases at this point in time, a phase occurred where my eye problem got worse again. And I thought, right, I've got an appointment with my eye doctor coming up soon. Let me try taking them again, see what happens. First day, fine. Second, third, fourth, fifth day, fine. 6, 7 came around. And then, beep, 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 started getting chest pain again. Just a little bit. And immediately I was like, stop. As soon as I felt it coming, I was like, nope, we're not doing that. Lansoprazole, Gaviscon. I was like, clear out my stomach. What must have happened is that when I'm doing the eye drops, they're draining down through my nose, the back of my throat, down into the stomach and causing a reaction. After I stopped the steroids immediately, they went away. Didn't have it after that. And that basically solidified for me that what had happened from the beginning of that was that the steroids I was taking for the eye problem had given me gastritis and Possibly a mild ulcer, we'll never know. I immediately self-medicated, so I probably masked it. They would have gotten worse if I didn't. Not everyone has access to the drugs to be able to do that. But I relayed this to the gastroenterologist. I said, look, it has to be this because now I can trigger it on command. And I told him, look, now we know steroid eye drops can cause gastric issues. So keep this in mind for future patients. And he said he will. He definitely will. God, just talking about that endoscopy, it's weird. It's like I can still feel what it was like. I don't have that with many situations. So they must have been mildly traumatic to bury it into my brain. So that was the gastritis situation. And then what? After having amazing control over my balance issues, they started to come back more frequently right before we moved in here. I think it was to do with the heat during the extreme heat waves that we were getting. So I'm trying to get control of that again. And now there are more types of tinnitus that have appeared, fluctuating ones that move between the ears, and they kind of mask over the top of sounds that I'm hearing as well. The point of all of this, again, is to say I want to be the guy that just works and produces things all the time at incredible speed, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. And I've had a lot of time to think about how to make that work. But all of this stuff that happens is a fight. Even though I am in a much more stable state now, I fight the remnants of it every day. There's a specific routine I have to do for my eye care, for my stomach. There's an order I have to consume things. For my balance, there's things I have to take. There's a specific regimen of supplements and a limit to what things like caffeine I can have. I have a stability plan in place. Nothing is simple. And I'm sure that in time, maybe not that long, maybe I'll finally get a break for a while. Something else will eventually reappear, or something brand new will appear. I'm waiting for the cancer diagnosis. It just feels like, with everything that happens, that feels like one that's on its way. So I'm trying to take steps to maybe reduce the likelihood of that. Since we've moved here, I've been a lot better with exercise. And I feel like my diet's improving and I'm just working on it, which is why I'm so interested in doing the medical related projects. Why am I telling all of you this? Because I only tell people on the main channel when things happen, when they become intense enough to the point where I need help from an outside perspective, especially if it's financial help, which is why I raised money to go and see that professor, the professor that wasn't very useful before the researcher. I don't like being the complainer. I don't want the channel just to be Curtis complains about his life while trying to get back to how he was in 2018-19. The problem is I also have the gift of foresight now, after having done so much YouTube and product stuff and finding success in both of those things and speaking to every creator under the sun in this community. No, literally, there are new ones now as well. The point is that life and the world changes, that you can't go back to how things were. Maybe it worked at the point in the past, but projecting into the future, you realize that you have to organize your life in different ways to keep moving, and it's always evolving and always dynamic. People might wonder, why are you focusing on making new channels? New channels are boring, they're just small things. Channels change people's lives, and they start as small things, but they become massive things in their influence. But also, influence isn't just about size or view count, it's about how it affects people's lives. So here's the thing. Some of the biggest channels on YouTube are the most boring ones with the least meaningful impact in the world. Meaningful impact being a key thing. I got a weird comment on my main channel from someone with it can't have been 10 million subs, something like that. 4 million subs, something large. And it was a mean one. It was a weird one. It was like, what the fuck happened to your hands? Talking about the nails. There's always insecure guys talking about the nails. I think a lot of men today are obsessed with being strong and manly, but they're scared of nails, which is the weakest thing I can imagine. But I looked at their videos, I was like, how does someone with this many subs be such a weak-minded asshole? And I looked at the content and it was extremely unimpressive. There was about 20 videos, 2 or 3 of which had 10 or 20 million views, just because they were interesting scientific experiments. But he hadn't posted a video in 2 years, so there was no community. There was no value there. It was just, here's quirky, interesting thing to look at. There's no brand. There's no connection to a community space that grows out into people's lives and then lifts them up by helping them to develop skills and stuff like that. Size isn't meaningful. Real tangible changes in life are meaningful, and I know how to grow those. It just takes a long time, and you have to lay the bed. You have to build the engine before you run it. And the problem now is I've had so much time in between all the stuff that's been slowing me down to think about how to do that, to the point where it's largely just intuition now. And people keep asking me for advice, getting confused when I say what I'm going to do. But my intuition says just slow down, get everything in order, then run. But don't run before you've gotten everything in order, which is why I am slow. And I've been very slow to update things and talk about things and release things and build things, which is why Modular Workspaces hasn't been updated, and the Easy BPY update's taking ages, and Afterglow hasn't had an update, and Modular Metals hasn't had an update, and Procedural Patterns hasn't had an update. Then Biogen is still broken, and the services page isn't complete, and Blender Nest hasn't had any new recordings, even though people keep asking for that, and the Blendstream website hasn't been updated with any content. I'm not grateful necessarily for all the things I've had to experience over the last few years, but I do appreciate the perspective it gives, and I appreciate how it's changed my brain in that I'm a bit more confident with the direction now, without immediate results, without immediate gratification, just because it feels right. The lowest point of the eye issue taught me, I think, a few perspective shifts, particularly not taking shit from people. Everything online became so small. Like everything YouTube related became the smallest part of my life. Any mean comment I got became pathetic. Maybe not immediately. Before the eye problem, when my nan was passing, someone left a mean comment on one of my videos, and I slaughtered in a way that I haven't ever done. But it was the first time I just did not hold back. I just ripped into someone, which is not something I usually do. Nowadays, I'm a bit better at just hiding people and letting it go. Not all the time, but I got hateful for a short while. Now, not so much. The eye issue has taught me just not to take shit. Not in the way of necessarily fighting back against it, although I do believe you should stand up for what you believe in, but in the way that things just don't affect me. My life, regardless of all the stuff that's happened, is good and privileged and lucky. I get to experience things that most people around the world and throughout human history don't really get to. They don't get this level of comfort that I can have, despite everything. And I know that a mean comment is not going to change that. And even if everything disappeared, I'd still be okay. When you're growing up, everything feels like life or death. Like you have to make it. Otherwise, you'll be homeless and everything will disappear. I've learned to let go of that more because there are more important things to pay attention to. So yeah, with everything we've spoken about, there is more detail in all of that. But like I said, I'm not really one for sharing all of it. So this is just a therapeutic retrospective now. Then far be it for me to test fate by saying I'm ready for something when I won't be, but I am ready to move on. Thank you for watching and have a great day.